See, in light of William Saliba's back injury, looks like they're interested in bringing in a centre-back this window. John Stones or Ezri Konsa. Could it be one or the other?
Yeah, it feels like a real blow for Arsenal, doesn't it? William Saliba missing for what is set to be a long period of time. No surgery, which is good news, but Arsenal already looking at their defensive options in this transfer window. I think it's fair to say they are quite solid in terms of the strength and depth Arsenal build up over the course of the last few seasons, but it's felt they maybe want to get one more through the door. John Stones, a free agent now, and Ezri Konsa, the Aston Villa defender. Two options that are being looked at. Now, Stones is a free agent, so you'd think a deal would be easier to be done in this transfer window. But saying that, the likes of Chelsea are interested. There's interest from Italy as well. He's in a really good position after a really solid World Cup with England. And as it comes to Ezri Konsa, we understand that Arsenal have been exploring a deal to sign him from Aston Villa. But at this moment in time, there is a significant gap between what Arsenal are willing to pay and what Aston Villa are willing to sell him for. Let's bear in mind, Villa have sold some key players already in this transfer window. We can take a look at how the two players compare if Arsenal are weighing up right now which one to go for. Clearly, John Stones 4 years older than Ezri Konsa. When you look at his club career trophies, 15 compared to Konsa's 1. Konsa winning the Europa League with Aston Villa last season. And actually, Ezri Konsa, when you look at his body of work over the last 2 seasons, really, this looks at last season in all competitions. Look at that, 3,035 minutes played compared to John Stones. That was one of the talking points going into the World Cup. Is he match sharp? Has he got in his legs? But he did show he still has a real role to play for England and for another club when he eventually gets a move this summer. So plenty for Arsenal to think about right now. And I think Arsenal fans will be pretty happy to get either of these men through the door because it's a real blow Saliba missing the start of the season, it seems.
Yeah, John Stones, terrific World Cup. But Arsenal have got the strength in depth. Mosquera, Ben White, Jurriën Timber. They've got plenty of centre-back cover if they don't get...
Might see who those number 2 and number 3 choices in that left wing position might be, because Sam, that is clearly an area they would like to improve. Martinelli just 1 Premier League goal last season, albeit against Man City, but 1 goal. And obviously Trossard has gone off to Besiktas, which maybe raised eyebrows for some, did for me. I think he's been a good player for them. He's a good player for Belgium at the World Cup as well. But he's gone to Besiktas for 17 million. I saw he started 21 Premier League games for Arsenal last season. So a hole to fill there, but could that be Christos Zolis?
Yeah, Christos Zolis is a really interesting one in the fact that if you look at the 2 profiles between Zolis and Trossard, they're very, very similar. You know, Zolis is a player who can play out wide, but can play as a number 10, which is very similar to Trossard. They're also very similar style-wise. They've got very similar injury histories. And so you can see that one making sense. But the problem is that Arsenal need top draw in that position. Neither Trossard or Martinelli really nailed down that left-hand side last season. Even though Trossard probably ended the season as clear first choice number 1, there wasn't quite the output that people were expecting. There was certainly not matching the output from the other side of the pitch in what Bukayo Saka brings to the team. I'm sort of with Darmish on this one. I don't think that it's a huge blow for that Arsenal missed out on Morgan Rogers, especially for the price, £117 million, 100 million plus. That gets you for a club like Arsenal, who, you know, don't have that history that Chelsea have of spending that type of money regularly. You know, for Arsenal, that should get you someone like Declan Rice, transformative of the team. There was a little bit of unknown of where Rodgers would fully fit in. Would he be a left winger? Would he be that number 1 choice on that left hand side? Is he actually a left winger, or is he more someone who's going to, you know, compete with the likes of Martin Odegaard and Eberechi in the middle? There was that unknown. You know, they have also invested £60 million in Eberechi Eze this time last year. He's a very, very similar player. So yeah, obviously Arsenal need that top draw level improvement in that left wing position, because if they go with Solis and they sell Martinelli and then they bring in someone who's maybe, you know, not quite as proven, is that better than having Trossard and Martinelli, who are proven at that Premier League level? I'm not exactly sure.
We'll come on to a couple of other names they've been linked with as well, high-profile names and potentially big money names as well. But Nick, I think it's just worth stating here, as we're stressing about transfers that Arsenal are or aren't making. You know, they're Premier League champions, Champions League finalists. You sat down with co-chair Josh Kroenke at the end of the season. A group of journalists were able to hear his thoughts. And he came up with the line, we're going to look to strengthen because we know teams around us are going to get better. If you're not trying to continually evolve and improve, you're standing still. Is that the fear at Arsenal, that they've got to the top of this mountain and they want to stay there now, but they know it's going to cost them to do that?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a fear. I think it's just an acknowledgement of where they're at. Kroenke talked about having put the foundations in place. He said that's often the hardest part of the journey to get the foundations. To build a kind of winning squad, to put the winning culture in place. Arsenal have done those things, and now it's about adding top quality to improve the team. Last summer was very important in terms of adding depth and strengthening the squad in a number of different areas. I think now they appreciate that the transfer strategy has to be different. They're trying to do something different. It's about elevating the team in certain positions, and I think the left side of the attack is probably the most obvious one, isn't it? And I think they need something a bit different in that position. They need someone explosive, someone who can dominate 1v1s, someone who can break games open in the way that Morgan Rogers showed he can do for Aston Villa. It's clear that that is why Arsenal were interested. I think that's why Arsenal are interested in Bradley Barcola as well, another player who excels in those 1v1 situations. Arsenal ranked 9th in the Premier League last season for attempted dribbles. I think that tells you quite a lot about the lack of kind of spontaneity on the ball, and Arsenal have some fantastic strengths as a side, don't they? Defensively, they're brilliant. We know how good they are on set pieces, but if there is room for improvement, I think it is sort of in open play, isn't it? And I think that is a key area for them when they look at how to evolve this team. To just diversify their attacking threat a little bit, and in order to do that, I think they do need to sign players capable of breaking games open and beating teams who sit back and frustrate. And I think these players come at a cost, don't they?
Yeah.
Especially when they're proven to be top quality.
And players who can set the tempo as well, Darmish. And there's two central midfielders I wanted to touch on with you. Two players at sort of different ends of their career, where you've got Alex Scott, a young, exciting English talent, 22 years old, and you've got Bruno Guimaraes at Newcastle, 29. This has been ruffling feathers among Newcastle fans. They thought they might lose Tonali and then Bruno as well this summer, but it seems like Arsenal are pretty serious about their interest in this Brazilian.
They are, like I explained before, we've already got 2 targets. There will be other targets that we probably don't know about just yet, but yeah, you do mention at both ends of the scale. Alex Scott, the information we have on that at the moment is that Bournemouth don't want to sell in this transfer window, but the problem that they've got, he's into the final 2 years of his contract, and the information we have is he's not going to agree terms on a new deal. So do Bournemouth say, no, we've still got that 1 year insurance, if you like, at the end of this season? But that's a risk in itself, because then Alex Scott could then find himself in a position to say, actually, I'll just see out the remainder of this contract. I'll be 24. I'll still have some fantastic years ahead of me.
William Saliba's injury has completely changed Arsenal's summer priorities. The Frenchman picked up a back problem during France's World Cup semi-final defeat to Spain, and while surgery has reportedly been avoided, he's now facing a lengthy period of rehabilitation that could keep him out for an extended stretch. For a club that just won the Premier League title, losing one of their most important defenders for months rather than weeks is a genuine crisis, and it's forced Arteta to move fast in the market for cover. That brings us to John Stones. According to multiple reports, Arsenal are seriously considering a shock-free transfer for the former Manchester City defender, who left the Etihad at the end of his contract after a decade in Manchester. Arteta knows Stones intimately from his own days as Pep Guardiola's assistant, and he's been open about his admiration, saying publicly that Stones is a player he's always liked and followed closely. The appeal here is obvious. No transfer fee, no lengthy negotiation with a selling club, and a player who's just proven his fitness with 5 appearances for England at the World Cup. But it's not a straightforward call. Some reports suggest Arsenal might be better served finding a younger, more robust long-term option rather than leaning on a short-term fix, especially with question marks already surrounding the depth of their back line. Still, with Stones available and Arteta a known admirer, this remains one of the most realistic and cost-effective options on the table. The other name in that same conversation is Ezri Konsa. Arsenal have also registered interest in the Aston Villa centre-back as an alternative or even a parallel option to Stones, and reports describe him as a genuine contender to come in as cover. The problem here is money. Aston Villa are reportedly valuing Konsa at around £60 million, and that gap between his asking price and what Arsenal want to spend on essentially a squad reinforcement is significant. Sporting director Andrea Berta will have to decide whether that kind of outlay makes sense for a player who wouldn't necessarily be a guaranteed long-term starter, especially with Arsenal already having spent big elsewhere this summer. Right now, the picture forming is that Stones represents the pragmatic, low-risk route, while Konsa would be the more expensive, arguably higher upside swing. Now let's shift to the midfield and Alex Scott, another name that's been heavily linked with Arsenal throughout this window. Scott has become one of the most sought-after young midfielders in the country after his performances for Bournemouth, and while Chelsea have been the club making the most aggressive moves, formally submitting a bid worth around £64 million that Bournemouth swiftly rejected, Arsenal have also been credited with long-standing interest. The complication for every suitor, Arsenal included, is that Bournemouth are adamant Scott isn't for sale, and they're reportedly planning to sit down with him after the transfer window closes to discuss a new contract, possibly with a release clause attached for a future move. For Arsenal, that means patience might be the only path forward here, and Scott may not be a realistic target until Bournemouth's stance shifts. Finally, let's talk about the one that's generated the most excitement among Arsenal fans, Eli Junior Krupi. This kid has been a revelation.